Good morning. It is just before 11 a.m. here on Thursday, the 12th of August 2021. My name is Arran Hunt. I'm an immigration partner here at Stace Hammond. And we have just had today the Reconnecting New Zealanders with the World Forum. This was an event for the last 2 hours being run in conjunction, of course, with the government. The Prime Minister spoke along with a number of the experts, including Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. We're going to quickly go through what was covered in that session today. There isn't much there probably for migrants, but it does give an idea as to what the government is doing over the next 6 months, year, 2 years sort of approach. Nothing really detailed and nothing really focused on migrants in particular, but it will give an idea perhaps as to how long you may have to wait for the border to reopen. For those of you who are looking at a GVV or looking to come back to New Zealand because you're on a post-study work visa, that sort of thing, this information today does generally suggest that it is going to be long-term rather than anything soon. So just a few things. First thing, there was a few things that came out yesterday, as they do often do. They'll come out in advance, little sort of teasers. There was that there'll be a phased reopening. We've been saying that for months. We've been saying that for the last year. They'll do a phased reopening. We were right. Travel from bubble countries for those who are fully vaccinated. We'll come to this shortly. It will be at least 6 months to prepare for reduced border restrictions. So what we've got currently in place now will be in place for at least 6 months. However, we are going to cover that slightly in a moment. If Delta is found in New Zealand, the expectation provided by the Honourable Chris Hipkins yesterday was that we would go back into level 4. Now, level 4 for those offshore is our highest level of lockdown. I think it's probably the highest level of lockdown in the world. Perhaps Philippines is a bit higher with their maximum lockdown, but it's definitely up there, higher than we see in other Western countries. Now, the one thing actually yesterday was that they did add Indonesia and Fiji to the high-risk countries. So those of you coming from Indonesia or Fiji, you're now required to do 14 days outside those countries prior to coming to New Zealand, unless you are a New Zealand citizen. That does apply to residents as well. So residents who are in Fiji or Indonesia, you must spend 14 days somewhere else and show that before you can board your flight to New Zealand. Okay, so today basically started out with a panel. You'll see the panel photograph in the screenshot, the thumbnail for today's video. A couple of quick quotes there. It's Dr. Professor Skegg said that this is about how we'll reconnect with the world over the next year or two. Now notice the wording of the year or two. This is a long-term strategy. And he did point out that the virus is winning the war. We are still seeing a lot of deaths and a lot of infections around the world. This virus is changing, is getting worse, and as people don't get vaccinated, they become a breeding ground possibly for new variations. Now, he wants to, of course, minimise people coming into New Zealand. That's the best thing for those who are on shore. There is, just looking through my notes here to see what we can sort of cover later on. Just a note here on Sydney and as to why they do want to maintain this protection of the border is that looking at Sydney, the current infections in Australia is based on one limo driver who drove aircrew several months ago. Because of that person, half of Australia is now in lockdown, with Sydney being in lockdown for the last 7 weeks. Of course, no, we're not blaming that person, but he was sort of the case, the ground zero, the case one for this current outbreak in Australia. It just shows you how virulent Delta strain is, and the Prime Minister actually noted that in the opening of her speech, just following on from the panel, where she said that, was it 1 in every 1,625 New Zealanders have had COVID-19, where 1 in 9 US have had COVID-19. That shows you the difference between how the handling of New Zealand versus other countries have been in regards to COVID. Delta is 3 times more infectious, means that one person will, on general, infect 9 others. Now, of course, if you look at how that goes, you have 1 person to 9 person to 81 people to just going to numbers that are too big to, in my head, 729, I think. So it spreads extremely quickly, which is why they are going to probably go to level 4 if it is seen in the wild in New Zealand. Now, according to the Prime Minister, the view of the Cabinet was to maintain this idea about elimination, keeping it from New Zealand, eliminating it from the community. There has been people who have said, it will get here eventually, and that is possibly the case, but you look at Australia, when it gets there, it spreads so quickly. So that's why the government is staying with that elimination mentality. She did put forward several principles that the government is looking at at running with over the next sort of 6 to 8 months to a year. First one, of course, is that maintaining the elimination strategies. Vaccination is a big point here. There's 45,000 vaccinations a day currently going to 50,000 vaccinations by September, October. Which is sort of the target they've been heading for. They are almost hitting that target. They're going to sort of ramp up to that point. 848,000 people have now been fully vaccinated in this country, so about 1 in 5, and 1.4 million have received their first dose. Now, next one in regards to the next principle is that there is a change to the vaccination scheme, in that currently it's about 3 weeks between shots. It will start going to being 6 weeks between shots. Now that means they can get more people vaccinated with their first shot earlier, but there'll still be an allowance if you want to get the second shot earlier. There will be a tick box when you're registering that you can get it earlier rather than waiting 6 weeks. It's not being forced on you. What it does mean though is that those who want to get vaccinations can get started earlier, with it being opening up to all ages from the 1st of September. So just in about 3 weeks' time, any person of any age can go and get, register to get a vaccination. Now, it's not clear. I think this is going to be the date they can get vaccinations. We have had in the past some discussions over whether dates were about when they can book, when actually it takes place later on, whether that was sort of a bit of a government spin. But from her wording today, it did look like 1st of September was the date they could start getting vaccines at any age. Now, principle 3 was that they wanted to look at reducing lockdowns by improving contact tracing. So lockdowns, of course, may occur if we do have Delta in the wild. They will definitely occur, but contact tracing has done well for us in the past. Sydney has seen their contact tracing fail miserably with this Delta variant because it just spreads so quickly and so voraciously across the area. So that's an area she wants to definitely lock down, make sure that we do very well in lockdowns, that the contact tracing is still there. That limits our time in lockdown because they can work out where it's come from, where it's gone, and get people into MIQ. Now, they are looking at changing things from the first quarter of 2022 in regards to MIQ. So this is still 5-6 months away before this is going to come in place. That's what Professor Skegg said earlier. Now, what they're going to do is they're going to break it down into 3 pathways. You're going to have the low-risk pathway, being those who are vaccinated and have spent at least 14 days in the last 14 days in a low-risk country. There will be testing requirements, but no need for isolation. Then there's medium risk, which are those who are vaccinated and who have spent the last 14 days in a medium risk country. There will be testing requirements there, and there will be modified isolation. Now, that will mean they'll start out probably at the 14 days isolation, but they may come down to a 7-day period or a 5-day period, just as a caution. So you'll have these shorter MIQ periods coming through. Then you have the high-risk ones. These are the unvaccinated. By default, where we have come from, you're high risk if you're unvaccinated. Or vaccinated travellers who have come from a high-risk country or spent 14 days, or in the last 14 days have been in a high-risk country. They will have testing requirements plus the 14 days of MIQ as it is now. That will remain in place for the foreseeable future, possibly for the next several years. So vaccination, as well as giving you a chance to have a better life and avoid the worst causes of this, will also allow travel to New Zealand a bit easier. Just to be very cautious here, this does not mean that those who are vaccinated can get a visa. This does not impact visas whatsoever. It's purely about who has to and who doesn't have to go through MIQ. However, this reduction in the need for MIQ, so people who don't need to go through MIQ because they are vaccinated, means that there's less demand for MIQ, which will hopefully mean MIQ can be opened up a bit more. They can look at other visa categories. So this is a good thing for migrants, those who are stuck offshore. As things improve and the MIQ opens up, people can start coming in and making use of it. Now, they are proposing, there's been a lot of discussion about whether there should be an isolation at home. We have this in the UK. My family have just been through it in London, where basically you arrive, you go to your home or you're staying, you might go out to get a test, you can go nowhere else, and while you're getting that test has come back. At that point, you then have sort of a couple of weeks in isolation at home, with only allowed to go and get food, that sort of thing. Now, there has been a lot of pushback from experts about doing home isolation, because people generally break the rules. You might think, oh, I'll just pop down here, I'll just do there, I'll just see some friends, and that's when you start breaking this home isolation, or you might have friends pop around to see you. And this is why when we see, especially New Zealand citizens, breaking MIQ, they really can't trust New Zealand citizens to go and do home isolation. So what they're doing is they're proposing a pilot in October to December this year for home isolation for those who are vaccinated and who are travelling on for business. So if you are travelling offshore as an employee and your employer needs to go offshore, then they'll look at, you can apply to get this home isolation allowance. It's only be open for a couple of hundred people to try it out and see how it goes. And the idea is because you have your employer who is sort of involved in the process and is most likely encouraging you to definitely stay within your home, then you're more likely to not break that home isolation. So that is going to be trialled later this year. That could be extended further, but again, I can't see that being opened up to everybody. It is going to be down to certain groups who, like, have in this case, have that element of somebody else keeping an eye on them. This will be monitored, people will keep an eye on them, there'll be spot checks, that sort of thing, and we'll have to see how that goes. Again, that takes pressure off MIQ. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there is going to be these low, medium and high-risk countries. Currently, we already have the high-risk countries being those of the Papua New Guinea, Brazil, India, Pakistan. Now we've got Indonesia and Fiji in there. Now, they will remain there. You're going to see an extension from that high risk. We're also going to have a medium risk and low risk. That will be largely based around the infection levels, but also the vaccination levels in those countries. So by the time this does come through, which is in 6 months, 7 months time, we're likely going to see perhaps some Asian countries in the low risk. Perhaps we might, probably won't see US. US probably be medium risk, I'm assuming. So will the UK. It will come down to how well they are handling this. They'll try and keep it from being political. It will basically be down to just the infection rates and vaccination levels. And that was actually about it for today. It was 2 hours of my time, which could have basically been done in about 5 minutes. Hopefully this video gives you a bit of an update as to what's going on. It sadly gave no information as to visa holders, particular no information as to those separated. The Prime Minister did mention the separated families, which was, it was nice of her to mention it, but it'd be nice if she gave her a solution to how to help those separated families. We will keep the pressure up on that, but this, at least, silver lining sort of a view, at least this gives people an idea that for the next 6 months we can expect the border to remain shut, and probably longer than that in 6 months' time they'll start looking at opening it a little bit, with bubbles in place for certain people. What we can expect actually from this in regards to bubbles is that places like Australia, when they do reopen, they'll open only to those who are fully vaccinated. I think the idea of having an open bubble with Australia is now gone. We've seen with infections in Australia, that's going to be the end of that. And that is the end of the video today. It has been a quiet several weeks, apart from my trip to Wellington last week. Not much in the regards to immigration news for any of you. There is, of course, the court case going on, which we're keeping an eye on. But we will come back if anything else does develop in the next week or two. Until then, kia kaha and stay safe.